Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. In this video, we're gonna go over what you need to do for a 100,000 mile service on this Gen 3 Dodge Ram. Let's get started. So let's just start this video off with the things that are due at 100,000 miles on this. What you would typically want to do is you would want to drain and flush your cooling system. That's the coolant that's going to be inside of your radiator/engine. What you would need to do for that is, of course, find the petcock, which on this vehicle is located on the driver's side of the radiator on the bottom. You would drain out that coolant into a nice collection bucket. Once you've done that, go ahead and fill it back up with some nice fresh coolant. Of course, use the manufactured coolant. Run it through for a little bit, and then you're going to repeat this process a couple times. That way there you can flush out all the coolant that's inside the system and get the majority of it to be the brand new coolant as it should be. And while you're at it, let's just take a look at the radiator cap. You want to make sure that the seal's in good condition all along the rubber areas. If it isn't, it's a good time to go ahead and replace that. Speaking of coolant, you also have your radiator overflow right here. You're going to want to make sure that this has fresh, clean coolant in it. If you needed to, you could remove the whole reservoir and empty this out, or of course you could use something to just draw the existing coolant out and then replace it with brand new coolant as well. Something else that's going to be due at 100,000 miles on this involves the spark plugs and the ignition wires. On this vehicle, it actually has 16 spark plugs. It has 8 on the upper row and then also 8 along the side of the engine as well. Now, the spark plugs that are on the side of these engines are going to be iridium spark plugs, and those need to be checked and replaced every 100,000 miles. That's approximately when they tend to break down. At the same time as doing these, you're going to want to service the wires that lead down to them. Typically, you want to check them and make sure they're in good condition along the way, but at 100,000 miles, it really only makes sense to go ahead and replace those. As for the upper spark plugs, typically those are due every 30,000 miles, so you probably should have already replaced those a few times at this point. So that's pretty much what Dodge recommends for specific 100,000 mile services. But 100,000 miles is kind of a milestone when it comes to servicing things, so it only really makes sense to double check a lot of other things, especially things under the hood and under the vehicle while we're doing this, right? Now, as a mechanic, if you were to bring your vehicle to me and you said, hey Len, I've got 100,000 miles on my vehicle, I want to make sure it lasts another 100,000 miles, help me out and tell me what you need to do for a 100,000 mile checkover. I would of course pop the hood and I would check all of the fluids. You want to make sure that your brake fluid is in good condition. It's not dirty and it's definitely up to the line where the maximum is. If it's very low, then more than likely you either have a leak someplace or even your brake pads are worn low. Of course, I'm going to take a peek along the way. I'm going to make sure that my power steering fluid is in good condition. I can double check my oil level. I'm also going to go ahead and grab onto this belt right here. I'm going to try to inspect it. I like to give it a little twist, check those ribs, make sure I don't see a whole bunch of cracks. Typically, more than 6 cracks within an inch means it's bad, but if I see any cracks, usually I just go ahead and replace it. I'm going to give this a nice tug. Make sure that the tensioner works as well. If the tensioner is frozen, you're going to wipe out your pulleys on your engine, and that's going to be a major issue. This all looks pretty good, so let's go ahead and move along. You want to double check your washer fluid, make sure that's full, because obviously visibility is going to be very important when you're driving your vehicle. We're going to check that air filter. If your engine can't breathe because it has a dirty air filter, well, obviously that's going to be a big issue as well. You have your transmission fluid over there, go ahead and pull that dipstick. You want to check it while your vehicle's on a level surface and the vehicle's at a normal operating temperature. Make sure it's inside the hot lines. If it's over, well, you need to go ahead and make sure you take some out of there. If it's very low, or if it seems as though it's burnt, double check for a leak, make sure you don't have one, and of course, service the transmission. After we're done checking the fluids, it really only makes sense to check that electrical system as well. If you have a multimeter, you can go ahead over here and test to make sure you have 12.4 volts coming from your battery. If it's low, it either needs to be charged or it needs to be replaced. It's also a good idea to take a look at these terminal ends here. If you see any corrosion building off of them or funny colors, type of crusties or anything like that, it's something that needs to be cleaned because it could cause resistance and it could put a draw on your battery. These actually look really good. If for some reason you don't have a voltmeter and you feel as though your vehicle is cranking over slowly, well, check the age of the battery. Typically there'll be a sticker on there somewhere and it's going to kind of tell you, well, this battery was put in around, March of 2015 or something like that. If the battery's 5 years old, more than likely it should probably be replaced at that point. Of course, it's always a great idea to make sure all of your lights work, front and rear. Make sure your e-brake works. Something else that's a great idea to do is to make sure you check your tire wear. Go ahead and run your fingers along it, make sure it's nice and smooth. If it feels as though it's feathered, it probably needs to be rotated. You also want to check the depth. That's the area in between your treads. If you have yourself a penny that looks like this, you want to measure between the edge here and Lincoln's head, and that's approximately 2/30 seconds. If the tread kind of goes above his head or into his head a little bit, maybe around his nose, well, you're looking pretty good. But if it doesn't even go from the edge to the head, well, then you know your tires are too worn and they should be replaced. Keeping on talking about tires, let's move along to checking the front end, because that's going to obviously wear down your tires. If you were to put a jack with a stand underneath your lower control arm, that's going to put pressure on your suspension. At that point, you can come from the outside here, and you're going to grab your tire at 3 and 9 and give it a nice shake side to side. If this has movement side to side, more than likely it's from one of your tie rods, whether it's an inner or an outer tie rod end. You can also grab up and down, 6 and 12 like this, and if you have movement in that direction, typically it's going to be an upper or a lower ball joint. Or, of course, it could be a wheel bearing. If it's a wheel bearing, you're going to have movement in pretty much any direction, or even a noise when you give it a spin like this. Continuing on, talking about the front end, you also have your coilover struts right here. If your coils are in poor condition or broken, you're going to need to replace it, and generally you do that as an assembly. You also want to make sure you don't see any oil or anything like that coming out of the strut itself. If that happens, well, like I said, replace it as an assembly, and you do it as a pair with the other side front. You also have your sway bar links. Double check these bushings, make sure they're not dry rotted and cracked. Also make sure there's no movement from your sway bar. And then of course you have your sway bar bushings where the sway bar connects to the frame of your vehicle. If those are stretched, you're definitely going to hear a clunking over bumps. You're also going to want to take a complete look at your brake system from all the way up at your master cylinder, down all the brake lines, all the way to the calipers. Your calipers, you want to make sure that you don't have any leaks on them. You also want to make sure you can see the pads. If you can't see the pads in any way, you of course want to take off the wheel, but typically you can get a pretty good look at them. Also give those flex hoses a nice wiggle. Make sure they're not cracked in any way and they're not swollen. If you see a bubble coming off of them, you need to replace your flex hose. Looking up along some of the flex hoses, you're going to see the coupler. If your coupler looks like it's rotted like this one, you need to try to flake that off of there and just see exactly how rotted it is. If it looks as though a lot of it's missing and you can see rubber going down into the coupler, you need to go ahead and replace that flex hose as well. Check those brake lines, make sure they're not rusted and rotted. Of course, it's going to be a great idea to make sure you check your differentials. If you have a four-wheel drive vehicle, you're going to have a front differential, a rear differential all the way in the back, and in the center of your vehicle, you're going to have a transfer case. You want to check all those fluids, make sure that they're topped off, and of course, check the condition. They should have been serviced way before 100,000 miles, but it's a good idea to keep an eye on them anyways. When it comes time to rotating your tires on this particular vehicle, you want to take the 2 rear tires, bring them straight forward, and then crisscross the 2 front tires to the rear. Don't forget to check your spare tire. Okay friends, so that's what I've got for you on a 100,000 mile service if you were to bring the vehicle to me for checking it out. Like I said, 100,000 miles isn't a big deal, but it is a milestone, so there's a lot of things that I would go over. We went over the specifics of what's due in 100,000 miles, and it's a very short list, so the video would have been very short, but there's a lot of other things to pay attention to. With that said, I hope you liked the video. If you did, smash on the like button for me. It would mean the world. Leave me a comment, because I always love to hear from you. Subscribe and ring the bell. That way there you can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks.